Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Friday to you. We've got a great couple of guests here today. A really interesting and intriguing topic. I know that I'm really excited to hear what Bucky and Carolyn have to say about learning strategies in a pandemic. Before we get going, let me just go ahead and check to see who we've got in live so far. Of course, Kim is in. She's very excited to see Bucky this morning.
Hey,
Don, Linnea, Linda, instructional design lady, Julia, Kristen, thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so I'd like to just introduce you to our guests. They're from the University of Central Oklahoma, and they have I guess an extension, or it's an agency that's within the university called LX Studio. And they had one of their partners reach out to me and wanted to come on to the broadcast, had a variety of topics that they could cover, but the learning strategies in a pandemic was the one that kind of stuck with the community. And so we're very excited to talk about that today. Bucky has been a guest on TLDC in the past. And I know earlier in the week, I did some research on that one. And all I saw was that there were a variety of folks that said that their minds were blown when Bucky was on last time. It was, I can't remember. There were a bunch of quotes like on Twitter and stuff that people were quoting Bucky. And I think that was like in 2018. So it's been a few years.
A little bit, yeah.
And so I'm just going to introduce you, Bucky. You're the Chief Learning Innovation Officer of LX Studio.
That's right.
Right. And then Carolyn you're the biz dev person over there.
Yes, I'm the Director of Business Development and Client Success. So, sort of take everything from intake and assess what people's objectives are to ensuring that the end product meets their needs. So
So we're very excited to have you. Why don't we go ahead and just start with what is LX Studio and how do you guys approach your learning design work?
Sure. So LX Studio, we consider ourselves a one-of-a-kind agency, as you noted, out of the University of Central Oklahoma. Our work is really based around the principles, I know some people have noted, of learning environment modeling. And that's really our approach to learning strategy. And expands from, initially we really started in this online learning space, but really expanded our approach to learning and training development across all modalities, as well as sort of approaching work as it pertains to conference development or really any situation that we would consider to be a learning environment. Learning environment modeling has been something that's been at the university, started in 2010. Kind of the institute was kind of created in 2016, and we've now grown into sort of our own studio and agency. The science around learning environment modeling is it's really a suite of tools and approach, a visual aspect to sort of taking a high level approach to learning as we strategize sort of who our learner is, what are the learning objectives, and really how do we ensure that this end product that we're designing meets the needs of our learners in the most effective way. So I'll maybe let Bucky expound a little bit on sort of the science behind that.
Yeah, so we've been, learning environment modeling was something that we created to solve a problem, right? And I think folks in this community are so geared around that idea of how do we solve problems and really make it meaningful. And, for us, it was really how do we enhance the communication that happens when people come up with ideas for learning and actually try to put it in the real world. And so it grew out of an idea. It built on all the sort of pieces that an innovation story has, and brought us to today. And we're continued to be on that journey. We're never done. We're always growing and developing. And LX Studio is that vehicle that we really allow us, in my opinion, to serve the community. It's the best of what a university should be doing, and it's an absolute pleasure to be on this journey to do that work. So
yeah, thank you. As you guys can see in the chat, Kim is she already posted, I think it was a few days ago, she posted about LEM, learning environment modeling. Yep. And it's funny, when I had done some research earlier in the week, I found a PDF to information about LEM on HubSpot. I'm like, wait a minute, what is an instructional design article in PDF format for doing in a HubSpot archive? I was really surprised to see that, because that's typically sort of a marketing thing, but
sure,
obviously it's incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Excellent.
What we found is, and this stretches people's minds sometimes, is we begin to think about learning in a much more broad way, right? You know, we oftentimes we think about, you know, you have a training or you have a class or a seminar, but really when we sort of zoom out and we think about learning in a broad way, it does include things like marketing. It includes things like, you know, change management and innovation within organizations. And it brings our community to the table to really help our organizations thrive. And I think that's the real key part about it.
I think one of the fun parts about our approach to it is as we sort of onboard a client, one of the first things we say is bring the stakeholders to the table, but also bring the naysayers to the table, right? So that as we walk them through this experience, right, of outlining who these players are and what the outcomes and objectives are, even if that end vision they had in mind isn't what we end up with, they come along for that journey and feel really included in that process. And the other thing is you in this sort of upfront work get stakeholders engaged so that by the time you're at this development side of it, which we all know is sort of that longer part of the process, the more expensive part of the process, you've already sort of worked through some of these back end problems that a lot of us encounter, which really makes the process go a lot faster. Sometimes people want to say that upfront work is like extra work, but in the end, they see that it has such significant value in really expediting the real development work and sort of that content build.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. And, you know, I guess that not to totally derail our pandemic discussion, but well, one, where could people find more information about this model? Like if they just wanted to go out after this broadcast and, you know, could they just go to LX Studio or where would they go to understand more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, check us out at lxstudio.com. You could go straight to our website. It provides information about learning environment modeling and how you can get more information there. And we've published a lot of articles. So if you go to our blog.lxstudio.com, there's a ton of great pieces out there where you can go and download, learn more about it, and even see some of the case studies where, you know, we've been able to sort of deploy that into action. There's some we talked about quotes. There's some great quotes in some of the videos out there about it.
Yeah. And we'll put on our page as well sort of our LXD course, which is a 5-week blended course, both asynchronous and synchronous learning, is sort of a initial introduction to the learning environment modeling language and how you can take some of our key tools and put them into action. We'll have a cohort for those courses starting both this summer and then another one this fall.
Yeah, Linda was asking if we could post the links in there. So thanks for posting that in there,
yes.
Bucky. And like Kim is saying, corporate L&D is challenged to rise above the level of courses to beyond a curriculum to continuous learning.
Absolutely.
We like to
nowadays.
Absolutely. We like to talk about, you know, this idea of our role is to create lifelong, life-wide learning. And I think this is a great sort of like segue into the pandemic situation that we find ourselves in now, is that, you know, people find, you know, historically think about it's in a very sort of focused way, right? They don't think about all the sort of opportunities to learn. And I think what we will find is that people are engaging in those transformational learning moments, whether they realize it or not. And it truly is that lifelong, life-wide learning that we as L&D professionals are really going to be charted to help support there.
Yeah. And I think, you know, to sort of pivot a little bit about the pandemic, I think what we've seen is sort of two sides of the table, right? We had a lot of organizations that had in-person training, might have been not willing to adopt online learning and what some of those additional modalities kind of forced into sort of a new approach to looking at this. And then we had large companies who, you know, had all this different training and had to shift what that looked like. And I think the strategy approach to this is let's take a look at what is effective, where the true environments this learning needs to happen, and how can we engage these learners to continue that. You know, so much of conferences, you know, went online as the pandemic came, right? And we consider the conference to be, you know, a huge learning experience, a learning environment, right? And you had high engagement. But as the year has gone on, I think we're going to see that conference strategy is going to have to shift. People have been on Zoom for a year. They're tired, right? How much time do they want to engage? How can we sort of reshape these environments to create learning spaces, but also learning and social interactions that really create connections for people in new ways?
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, so we had this question here about why does learning strategy play a critical role in learning environments? So maybe we can just sort of start there and move towards that pandemic topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting. I think one of the most fundamental sort of like principles, I guess, from my perspective, is that there's this incredibly important connection between the learning environment and the experiences that it creates. And I like to sort of talk about this from the standpoint of think about your time maybe in college or at a corporate training seminar, something like that. You go in and the room is arranged in rows. And that environment shapes the type of experience that you have there, right? No one says anything, but many people come in, it's like, my job is to sit, be quiet, and listen, in that environment, versus maybe we go to a coffee shop and it's tables, you can smell the caffeine in the air, right? You're engaged in that moment. That environment creates a very different type of experience. And the same thing happens here, right? And so when we think about our role as professionals in this space, we have to think firstly about designing the environments for learning to happen and be able to support the experiences that are there. Now, the strategy behind that simply answers, how will we help people learn, right? And that drives a lot of the design strategies that go into the environments that we create. We talked about for a moment about this sort of broader perspective of learning experiences. And when we do think about the environment, it immediately sort of opens the possibilities that maybe some folks have not thought about before, to all the way to those things like marketing or things of launching new products and the roles that learning plays in helping people to be successful with maybe a new product that they have bought, right? And so I would encourage us as a community to think about the true transformative impact of learning wherever the spaces and places may be that we're working in. So that's to me, that's, I think, what is really that's a passion of mine, right? How do we expand the role of learning in life? And I think when we think about it that way, there truly are those opportunities to do that.
Yeah. Is there anything like specific about, the remote situation and the working from home environment that you can sort of just touch on that you might be able to share with the community?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so there's so many dimensions to this, right? And I think we've all faced this. If you've been like me, maybe your kid has run in and, run across the screen, or the dog comes in, right? I think one thing that hopefully we've all learned is the humanness of learning, right? Mm-hmm. That in so many cases, we tend to think about learning as being in these sort of formal or very sort of structured settings. And the reality is we're always learning. And I think if we've learned anything over the last year, it's to be adaptive, to be nimble, and those sort of things. And that has really created an interesting dynamic when it comes to learning strategy, helping organizations to determine how they're going to help people learn. I recognize that, technology is only one component to that mix. I was talking with a group early on in the pandemic, and there was this sort of desire of like, well, how are we going to measure or assess that people aren't cheating on tests, or how are we going to do all these things that are very procedural in nature? And I don't want to discount those. Those are important conversations, but we also have to remember where people are at the moment, right? If we all go back to our Psychology 101 classes, we remember that little triangle, the Maslow's triangle. People are we're at the lower levels right there, right? And so in this moment, not ideal, but in this moment, how do we as learning professionals help people grow? And I think that means conveying things like care, love, support, all these sort of things that are so important to a learning environment that may not have anything to do with what test proctoring solution you're working or what technology you're using. And so I think it really has brought us back to the basics of what is learning and what is the strategy behind how we help people learn in that moment.
Right. And I think, one of the key elements of learning environment modeling is this idea of a learner persona. And we talk about the empathy of the learner, right? And I think role number one in the pandemic is we need to reassess these learner personas, right? These people are learning, their physical spaces have changed, their situations have changed, they're trying to be a learner, they're trying to be a parent, they're trying to be a homeschool teacher, right? They're trying to do so many other functions that we have to shift that persona if we want to expect to get the outcome out of that learner in the moment.
Absolutely.
No, I love it. I just reflecting back on the past year, I don't recall hearing anybody in any of our broadcasts talking about building or producing any of their learning with empathy, specifically in mind.
Yeah.
Or even like establishing trust. I know that for myself, that's kind of been one of my goals with TLDC, is to make sure that I can create an environment of trust, within this community, because it's so important. But this is really, really profound what you guys are bringing up. I mean, are there any other learning strategies that you've seen shift at all since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, if anything, it's like I said, it's brought us to the basics. But, there's been interesting trends that we've been seeing in working with groups. And I know Carolyn can talk a little bit about this too. But, we saw where organizations sort of shifted from what they maybe had been doing in an in-person world and moved it into a digital space. That it created different sort of data trends, right? They had jumps in enrollment. They had many people engaging more at that moment, probably for many different factors, of course, during that time period. But I think the real question is, what do they do about it now, right? This was a period of response, of dealing with the situation at hand. Now we have to look about recovery. We have to think about innovation from this standpoint.
We had a really interesting client that came to us at the beginning of the pandemic. All of their trainings in person, highly technical in nature, did not want to adapt to virtual spaces. But in that strategy portion of uncovering it, what we uncovered was the people that were working to train their sales force were spending exorbitant amounts of time answering the same questions over and over and over again. So while they needed to replace in-person training, they were able to identify so many more business problems they had that they didn't recognize. And I think that is really maybe even a function that people don't think of in training and learning development. And we have to get businesses to shift this way, that just because we're moving training online doesn't mean that is an ineffective way to produce messaging or content. Simply creating a library of learning for this company to push out to sales representatives allows their staff to focus on so much more of their business development and not reinvent the wheel day to day to day. I mean, we walked away from that conversation like, wow, but yet it was a problem that they almost didn't recognize, but didn't realize was impacting their day-to-day functionality, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So strategies during a pandemic, you talked about empathy and kind of really considering the learner and what they're kind of going through on a day-to-day business. Maybe as an instructional designer or trainer, kind of looking a little more broadly at what you're educating folks in. Are there any other strategies that you guys have seen that have worked during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to mind to me is recognizing that the people who are making the decisions about their training in organizations are also in a change position as well, right? They may have, a year and a half ago would have never thought that they would have been doing the things that they are now doing, right? And so as a strategy that we tend to approach is making what is invisible visible to them, right? So taking these ideas that they're trying to grapple with, how do we shift our conference online? How do we shift our workshops and seminars online? And not necessarily thinking about just the delivery mode, but asking the question, why? Why is that important? What are you trying to do? And helping them to walk through taking those ideas that are up here and putting them in a form that invites collaboration, new ideas, diverse ways of thinking. And ultimately that gets to the best sort of strategy that mobilizes and energizes that organization to change, right? At the end of the day, we saw this massive change management occurrence within a really short period of time. And so in any way, it's an accelerator. And so while our role is learning professionals, it is also change management professionals at the same time. And to help, the folks we work with not only understand how do you make that pivot in the moment, but how do you do it in a way that values return on investment and the value creation long term?
Right.
I tend to think about any organization, and this is a complete overgeneralization, but I think it's an important concept, is grappling with two things. There's the tension between creating new value and managing risk. And when we think about that, every organization is sort of pulling at those two major sort of macro trends. And what we found was certainly through the pandemic, the learning strategies were doing that, right? They were saying, well, how do we not lose a ton of revenue in our, revenue generating learning that we have, but also how do we create new value through people, right, in that way? And so they're still in that tension. It's kind of a rubber band. And so when we're designing learning strategies, we not only have to think about that from the big sort of macro picture, we have to give people a clear roadmap on how to implement and the steps that they need to take. I think there's incredible opportunity, but only if it's done in a way that is thoughtful and strategic and really values the systems that are in place there.
Right.
Nice. So the mindset should be of just sort of change management going forward. How about innovation? Like, how would you like, so there's kind of that balance there, right? Between change management and innovation, it's got to be practical, I suspect,
Sure.
Because it feels like a lot of like the pandemic hasn't put everything on pause. It's almost like we've just put in a brand new CD and we're listening to something entirely new now. Forget like pause. We're not going back to that old scenario.
Well, I'm glad you brought up CD because that's in my day, right? You gotta have
But I think it will create a conversation around reassessing the need for in-person engagements, right? And what that looks like. And I think that there will be a lot of conversation about, and it will be a gradual change, right? Where people feel comfortable and again, having empathy for learners. And that will happen at very different paces, depending on organizations. I even think regionally, that will probably happen at different paces if we look at what's happening around the country, but really being, using that strategy to think ahead, right? We don't want to be in another position where March 15th rolls around and our whole lives have to shift so quickly. We want to be able to reimagine those spaces and give our learners opportunities to experience new ways of learning and be able to, determine if that's working for us or not and be able to be nimble enough to shift. Mm-hmm. I think it's, I'm sure people saw Salesforce, a week or so ago announced different forms of returning to work environment. And they took a really interesting approach because they assessed sort of their whole workforce, what people were comfortable with, came up with a very, very number of options, and then also produced renderings of what innovative spaces might look like in this new environment. And I think we need to model that type of experience. We need to assess where people are. We need to give them options as they move into new ways of thinking, but then model that out for them to say, does this resonate with learners? Is it effective? I mean, learning objectives and data will help to drive whether this is working for us or not, and be nimble enough to make a shift where it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. No, that's great. Like, so with LX Studio, what are like some of the challenges that you've had to face over the last 12 months that you've had to, like, as far as learning strategies are concerned, that you've had to overcome? Is there anything that is more common than others that you guys are facing right now?
Well, I think, if there's one thing that we always sort of tell ourselves is that we're on this learning journey too, right? And that, we don't ever profess that we have everything figured out, right? It's all about how we create an environment that is nimble and being able to adapt and do all these sort of things that we talk about, right? And so I think at least for me personally, you do go back to the basics a little bit of how do people learn? How do they learn in this moment? And then how do you make it real? Right. So sometimes, we've found a lot of people, they will come to us and they say, well, we need a new platform, or we need a new, this huge idea. And it's cool to dream big. Right. But through the conversations, we try to guide them through that process in a very caring way of what's going to make a difference. Right? What's going to make a difference for your organization? And it may or may not necessarily be that huge dollar investment in technology and things of that nature. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes there are things that they can be doing right away that is going to make a difference. And so, for us, I think it very much mirrored that same process. I'll never forget, we brought our team together, and when things all sort of went remote, and me trying to be a good team leader, I said, okay, what do you all need? And our team was so resilient in that moment. Like, why are we even meeting? Let's just go back to work and do our stuff, right? And to me, that was a good signal that our team was invested. They were not only there for growing one another and supporting one another, but they were ready to support the people in the community that we're here to serve. And so I thought that was a really interesting point of resilience, that I think we probably all have stories like that we could share. One thing I want to go back to the topic of innovation for just a moment. This personally, and Carolyn will laugh at this, innovation is so important to me, right? Because there's certainly this idea of a pro-innovation bias, right? When you hear the term innovation, many people mean it's good. Not always, right? And so I think that we have to think about that there are truly some bad innovations out there, right? And our role as being thoughtful and considerate innovators in this space is to be able to help guide not only ourselves, but the folks we work with through that very complex process. And so about, I guess 2 years ago, so now I began working on a book called The Innovation of Learning, and we ended up publishing that I guess last year, a little before that. And I would have never even imagined the concepts that that book had in it, how they resonate to the work that we do today, right? It sort of thinks about how we navigate strategy, how we avoid risk, how we understand the inherent drivers that are in an organization of moving an organization one way versus the other, and how to bring people together around that. It was a very sort of serendipitous moment, at least for me, as I was reflecting back on that writing process, and then how it applies to the work that we do today. So.
Wow, that's fascinating. What was the book called again? We're going to have to, if anybody can look that up, maybe we can post it in.
Yeah, it's called The Innovation of Learning, and we'll put a link to it in the chat there. And it's it sort of covers the very sort of behind the scenes work at what drives this. So
right,
I love it.
And to talk about innovation, I saw Kim made a note about sort of us working with L&D companies versus higher ed institutions. And to kind of play on that, I mean, I think what has been really interesting is, there's always sort of been seen this academia approach to learning, right? That looks very different than what learning and training development looks like at your large corporate organization, right? But the reality is the strategy and approach and the outcomes are really the same. And what's really great for us is that the approach that we take to this work works across all of those types of clients. We focus highly on creating innovation and change through learning strategy within our own institution. We work with other institutions to help them make that happen, which is kind of unique, I think, for the work that we do. Here we are, at another university, helping them restructure what might be, a program to help them be more successful, but then also taking that same approach to help large organizations that you would know their names, right? How we can help them make this training more effective. The fun part, we joke about our work, is that we can talk about anything in one day, from plumbing to epidemiology to louvers and dampers, you name it. The approach is the same, which really shows, I think, how innovative it can be.
Yeah. There was the quote I always sort of drive back to, and I'm sure folks on this call will this cast will be familiar with Edward Tufte, the visual design guru, grandfather of visual design, and he sort of made this quote that really what we need to be doing is designing for the flatness of verbs, not the hierarchy of nouns. And if you think about that for a moment, many of our organizations are organized around nouns, right? The Department of Accounting, the Department of whatever. And in reality, learning happens in verbs. And so the work that we do through LX Studio is very much in that verb space. Is how do we help people learn? How do we help them do? How do we help them be better, right? These are questions that drive a lot of the work that we are so focused on.
That's fantastic. I actually want to ask a little bit more about LX Studio and just the relationship to UCO.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kim was saying, just like, what are the advantages of having an agency as a part of a university like that? It seems like there would be some really, really relevant things there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, the essence of a university should be connecting people. It should be improving the communities they serve. It should be doing all these things that are for the public good. And so, when we began to sort of create learning environment modeling and that developed, we knew we had something there that could truly add a unique value to the people that we serve. And so LX Studio is the embodiment of that vision of serving communities, of helping organizations, government, businesses come together to think about how we grow our society. And I know that's a very sort of big picture of it, but it truly is what drives us. I mean, our sort of mission as a team, our value is, we believe that learning is catalyst for a better world. And that truly drives why we do what we do every single day.
How do students get to take advantage of that relationship of LX Studio being connected? Yes.
So the cool part about this is we've actually taken some of our programs, our learning experience design programs, and embedded it in the curriculum within the colleges. So as a student goes through, they can earn micro credentials and things like that as they do that. And so the work that we are doing that is informed through real world work, our students are benefiting from it firsthand. And that's a really exciting thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I think, one of the other sort of goals for us is, as a metropolitan university, I mean, obviously our reach, we work with organizations all around the country, but as a metropolitan university, how do we fundamentally help to change education and business and opportunity with our own Oklahoma City metro area? And that has been another focus of ours, right? So how can we help the city grow, and how can we grow the efforts of workforce development as we come out of the pandemic and as Oklahoma City grows and shifts industries? Bucky mentioned micro-credentialing, is one of the big initiatives we have on our campus. One of the fun micro-credentials that we help develop is we have what we call a Blackmail Summit. It's an opportunity for high school male students to come and have an experience on our campus. And it's been a successful program, but now we've been able to micro-credential those skills, knowledge, and abilities for these students, and then take a credential and apply that to, their LinkedIn profile, to their college applications, right? So these kids can see that they're taking learning, and that learning is going to move with them to hopefully this next college experience, and then they can continue to progress as they go through that 4-year institution, a 2-year institution, a technical program that they're doing. They can have these skill components that can build with them to their next employment opportunity, which I think is really, really interesting, and it's been fun and impactful to the work that we do.
Nice. Can you define the micro credentials? Can you give us a little more detail on exactly what that is?
Yeah. So, we look at this from a very competency centered focus, right? So, a micro credential is essentially a competency, a set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that have value in the marketplace, right? So, these could be all the way from, learning how to, code something all the way through, maybe potential projects or things like that that are a component of a job. And so, what we do is we actually work with groups to understand what is that competency structure that drives the work and the evidence of learning that supports it. So it's not just enough to go sit in a webinar or sit in a class. What is the learning evidence that is produced through that? And that is then represented visually through like a digital badge or something of that nature. And so, what we believe is obviously, your traditional modes of credentialing will be there, college, degrees, diplomas, all that sort of thing. But, our perspective is that's going to be necessary, but not sufficient for the future, right? We're going to have to help people be able to visualize and show their learning wherever that may be. And so micro-credentialing is a way to create ladders of learning. It's a way to think about it both vertically and horizontally to show your competencies and capabilities as a professional, and be able to demonstrate that in ways such as like resumes or interviews or all sorts of things that are going to be so transformative, not only just to show what you know and what you can do, but to be able to open opportunities. And I think that is at the essence of what we're trying to do through micro-credentialing and marry the best of design and technology to be able to help that work happen.
Nice. So just so that I can understand the relationship that LX Studio has with micro credentials, is that something that LX Studios can help people develop, or is there a library of micro credentials that you guys offer, like kind of as a content thing?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yep.
Go for it.
Yep. So we can take sort of any work someone is currently doing, or if they're building that out, and embed that credential as we build that strategy component out. It was interesting. We had an interesting conversation with a large organization recently about how do you create a credential and training that incentivizes your employee to earn those credentials, right, and earn that badging, but incentivizes them to stay within your organization instead of taking that credential and leaving your organization, right? So it's an interesting approach to that work. Is you want people to be credentialed to show skills, knowledge, and abilities, but how do you then use that? Do you use that to help create a ladder of promotion and upward mobility for that person? Or what is also, I think you have to look at the skills, knowledge, and abilities are important to that person, but then what can they do with those credentials, and where do they take them from there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a concept in STEM fields called the T-shaped professional, right? If you visualize a T, like letter T, you have the vertical bar there is essentially deep knowledge about a certain skill set, right? I'm a data analyst and I know how to do SQL queries. I knew how to do all these sort of things, very, very deep there. But the horizontal part of the T are things like communication skills, negotiating skills, problem solving, critical thinking, right? The broad set there. And so when we think about, in part, how we design micro-credentials, we try to think about it in that model too, right? How do we help people show their depth of capability, but also show the breadth of capability to be able to work across an organization and be able to be successful in what we know is going to be so critical moving forward. I sometimes say it's like, people are hired because of the vertical, but they are invited to depart because of the horizontal, right? When you think about, they don't have the communication skills or things like that. And so we have to think about this from a holistic perspective to really help grow a well-rounded professional for the future.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, it almost feels like the whole conversation, a lot of what you're describing, you can really sort of see it if you know the basics of that learning environment modeling idea, just how you've kind of developed all of this from that. That's it's really kind of fascinating. I'm looking forward to kind of I downloaded that PDF that I found. So I think
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really does bring it full circle, right? It brings it around to use learning environment modeling as a visual system to help implement and design. And so these become more than just ideas, right? We've talked a lot about cool concepts and ideas and principles today, but what learning environment modeling does is it puts it into action. And that's where we create value. That's the true essence of innovation in that work.
Nice.
I think the fun thing we always hear was, I've always had this idea in my head, right? We all have great ideas, but in 1 hour, you were able to visually place it so that I can now begin to see how this would actually move an idea to something that we're going to actually produce. And I think that is one of, I guess, the greatest compliment we hear in our work, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, Kim does have one last question in here, and I think, you've kind of answered it, but she's asking, is learning environment modeling still a part of what LX Studio does? And she said she was exposed to it a while back, would love to learn more.
Yep.
And thanks for being a part of the community.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So learning environment modeling is at the core of what we do. So our systems of how we do the work that we do is all based on this suite of learning environment modeling tools. It's how we bring people together. It's how we refine ideas. It's how we take those ideas and implement them and really create the innovation and the value from that work. There's many and several different ways to get plugged into learning environment modeling. I'd encourage you to go to our website. You can sort of browse that idea marketplace, if you will, of how to use it in different ways that it can be beneficial for you. And so, and of course, there's a nice little form there if you want to hop on a call and talk about. We always love to talk about that work, but it continues to be a focus of our innovation and development of how we do what we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Now, I did find, I just looked my history and I found the PDF to the learning environment modeling language.
Yep.
Can I link that? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah,
You bet. Yeah.
We would say
All right,
the language is sort of the foundation piece that all of the rest of our tools and capabilities are sort of built off of. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, I highly suggest you guys in the chat take a look, give it a read. It's only 4 pages, but it's really incredible stuff. Is this something that you authored, Bucky? Yeah.
So learning environment modeling is our work. We developed that, and we sort of grow that work from that perspective. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, we've hit the top of the show. I want to go ahead and wrap up. How do people get a hold of you, find out more about, micro credentialing and everything LX Studio?
Yeah. Well, the best place to do is go to our website, lxstudio.com. And there's a contact form there, or I'll put in, we can drop our emails here in the chat as well. Always feel free to reach out that way. We're big believers in community, and I know this community is as well. And so it's a pleasure to be a part of that with you and part of that journey. And feel free to reach out. We'd love to connect with you.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys. We're really honored to have you. Good luck with LX Studio. If there's anything that TLDC can do on this end, let me know, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Happy to help on a Friday, Kristen.
Yeah, very good.
All right, you guys have a great weekend, everybody. I have the Community Day recordings ready to go, so I'm going to send out a link to everyone. I'll put it in our Slack group as well, so everyone can watch those recordings from a couple weeks ago. Other than that, have a great weekend. Thanks, Bucky. Thanks, Carolyn. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. Yeah, take care.
All right, take care.
Bye.